because I want to look at class methods. A class method is just a function that lives inside the class. So it's part of the blueprint of that car. And a method looks just like a function, except it's defined inside the class. So it's an indented part of the function, indented part of the class structure. And we define it just like we do a function. And so let's just say we have a really simple function inside that class, a really simple method. So let's type start car, and then print whatever your car makes. It's probably not a Corolla if it's making that sound. Definitely not a 1984 Corolla. Those are pretty much like a hand crank, I think, to start them. So, no offense to anybody who has a 1984 Corolla out there, but it's a fantastic car. It's like I said, probably still running. So there's one thing that's different, right? What do you see that's different from a regular function about this method? What do you see there that's different? I'll give you a hint. It's in purple. It says self, right? So what is that? Why did that show up there? What do we need? What's that? I didn't type that. What is self doing in my function as a parameter, right? What that means is that function or that method gets a reference to that object as part of its parameters. Because what you want to be able to do in that function is change the data that belongs to that object. So let's say this, right? I'm going to do another one, bool running, and the car is not going to be running at first. When I start the car, then the car becomes, and bool running should be false, sorry. When I start the car, bool running equals true. Now here's an interesting thing. What did I say about methods and variables that we create inside methods? You remember? It's the Las Vegas rule, right? What happens in the function stays in the function. Now notice, this is gray here, and it says true. It's missing something. It needs to start with self. Because what that means is self, that I'm referring to this copy for this object of this instance. So now each one of these cars, because I updated the blueprint for those cars, now both those cars have the running variable and also the start car. So now I can determine whether a car is running or not by checking the Boolean running variable. And when I create the car, if I print my car2 dot running, it will say false, right? But then later on in my code here, I can trigger the start car. I can say my car2 dot start car, and then I can print that if that check to see if it's running again. Okay, so look, I create the cars, I build the cars. Neither one of them is running when they get built. They roll off the the factory assembly line, they're not running. I check to see if it's running. It says false. And then I start the car. Starting the car prints something out and changes the variable for this to true. So now the car is running. So when I print it again, it'll say true. But I only started my car 2. My car 1 still is keeping the same variable. So there is my code sequence. And if I check to see if my car is running, you can see that my car is still not running, even though I started my car 2. So the nice thing about those 2 cars is that they're both based on the same blueprint, but what happens to one car doesn't affect the other car. So I can manage them separately. So think about some of the things that we've talked about in the past. We've talked about things like an employee database where we keep track of employee information. Think about how we could very easily create an employee class that has all of those properties and has things like give the employee a raise methods or fire the employee methods or all of that kind of thing, right? And each employee would be manageable on its own. And we could save those out to files using Pickle. So now we're giving ourselves some pretty advanced capabilities, even with pretty simple code. Let's elaborate a little bit more on this car class. Let's elaborate a little bit more on this car class. And let's say it has an odometer, right? So it says in miles. How many miles has this been driven? It starts at 0. And we could now define another class. And we could say drive car. We're going to keep self. And we're going to have an int drive. How many miles do we want it to drive? But now we're going to look at whether the car is running or not, because you can't drive a car that's not running. So we're going to say if self dot boolean running is true, then we are going to say self int miles plus equals int drive. So we're going to add the number of miles that you drive to the total number of miles driven. And we'll print you drove the car int drive. Got to make that an F string here so it works. There we go. And if the car isn't running, we need to print you need to start the car first. Okay, so now what it's doing is it's checking the value of running to see if it can drive. It has to be true. And then it drives that far and it gives some feedback. Otherwise, it says you need to start the car first. And that's all based on the internal value of the variable that goes with that car. So if I say print, or let's just say my car 2, drive car, and I have to give it the number of miles. Okay, if I try to drive the car before I start the car, it'll say you need to start the car first. So if I want to actually drive the car, I've got to move that down here to after I start the car. And then I can print the number of miles that I've driven after that. So starts out, the car is not started. So I start the car and then I drive the car 100 miles, and that is the new value of int miles, the property for that car. Okay. Car number one, still not started. So we can do a lot and package it all together. And then each thing, each car is in charge of its own stuff. The methods work on that data for that car. The properties belong to that car. It's all packaged together in one place. What we can also do is things like data handling, verifying whether input is correct. We can manage the data for that car inside that object, which means debugging gets really easy because everything is handled inside that one package.